Hello friends, I welcome you to the lecture number 23 of the course titled Psychology of Stress, Health and Well-being. So, this is second lecture of the module 8 and overall it is 23rd lecture. So, before we discuss about today's lecture, let us have a brief recap of the last lecture, that is lecture number 22. So, in the last lecture we have addressed the question that can we become happier or can we increase our happiness sustainably in a sustainable manner. So, in that context we have discussed that there are some obstacles or barriers in increasing our happiness, and there are some possible sources of optimism also. So, in the last lecture we have discussed particularly two specific barriers that kind of creates obstacle in increasing our happiness level or our sense of subjective well-being, and these two we have discussed two factors. One is called as genetic set point and another is called as hedonic adaptation. So, genetic set point, basically we in the context of genetic set point we have discussed that our genetic composition or genetics sets limits to our experiences, including happiness, the experiences of our happiness and emotions. So, our genes determines various characteristics, including our physical characteristics and to some extent our psychological characteristics and emotional experiences. So, we have discussed that our genetics set certain limits and also it creates a kind of baseline level of experiences of happiness. So, that kind of explains the stability of happiness in human beings. So, even though there are kind of temporary shifts in happiness or we become maybe very sad, but ultimately we generally remain at the baseline level of happiness, which differs from person to person. For some people this baseline level of happiness may be little higher, who are mostly express happiness in their life. So, for some people it may be lower, who express most of the time their mood may be in the in the lower side of sadness. So, this baseline level of happiness is determined by our to at least partially determined by our genetic set point or genetics, and evidences for this genetic set point was given by twin studies, where it was found identical twins report similar level of happiness or similar type of emotional experiences, even though they are raised apart and apart into different family background or environmental background. In the context of genetic set point, we have also discussed that genetics may influence our personality trait, and personality trait seems to, at least research indicate that it can influence our subjective well-being, happiness or emotional level. Particularly two personality traits we have discussed, one is called extroversion and another is called as neuroticism. So, extroversion was found to be positively related to subjective well-being or happiness, and neuroticism is generally found to be negatively associated with happiness or well-being. So, in that context our genetics may influence our personality traits, which in turn may influence our experiences of happiness or emotional experiences. So, these are some of the things that we have discussed in the last class in the context of genetic set point. The second important thing that we have discussed is which is a kind of barrier in terms of increasing our level of happiness is hedonic adaptation. So, hedonic adaptation is more like a psychological process by which individual return to their baseline level of happiness following certain change, following either positive or negative changes in their life circumstances. So, hedonic adaptation basically talks about the idea that people get adapted to changes in their life circumstances, and there may be shift in emotional experiences after positive or negative events in their life in the life, but we generally return to our baseline level of happiness because we get adapted to it, and it may be more like psychological adaptation. So, this process is called as hedonic adaptation, which may be influenced by genetics also. And we have discussed different functions of this hedonic adaptation. Particularly, we said this hedonic adaptation protects us from prolonged emotional consequences, or let us say if we experience for a prolonged time either positive or negative emotional experiences, particularly negative emotional experience, it may be detrimental to our body and mind, and we have discussed details about this in the past few lectures. So, and also hedonic adaptation help us to disengage from the old goals. So, because our emotional consequences goes down, we are able to disengage from goals which are no longer fruitful, and we are able to engage into the newer stimuli and the goals. In the context of hedonic adaptation, we have also discussed a model to explain how hedonic adaptation happens. It is called as AREA model, area model, proposed by Wilson and Gilbert, and basically this talks about the process of hedonic adaptation, and they say there are a few sequential steps that happens in the hedonic adaptation. One is we first pay attention, A is for attention, and then we react emotionally, R, and then we try to explain or make sense of the event, and this if we are able to make sense or explain the event, then emotional consequences goes down and we are able to adapt. So, we have discussed the details of these processes. Then at the end we have discussed that hedonic adaptation is not exactly same for both positive events and negative events. Research generally shows that people may not completely adapt to negative events. In certain negative events such as severe disability or maybe unemployment or divorce, some of the events which may have very strong impact on us, especially the negative event, people may not completely adapt to them, and it takes more time to adapt to negative events. However, on the other hand, positive events, people generally adapt to all kinds of positive events, and we adapt faster to positive events, and we have discussed some of the possible reasons behind it. So, today we will just continue from there, and we will discuss that there may be some very strong barriers to increasing our happiness, such as our genetics determine certain level of happiness. Hedonic adaptation kind of pulls us back to our baseline level of happiness level. So, we are, even though there may be temporary shifts, but we are not able to sustainably increase our level of happiness. So, the question is then is the pursuit of happiness is a futile thing? I mean, whatever we do, ultimately we are kind of doomed to come back to our baseline level of happiness. Then is it worth pursuing happiness in our life? So, we will try to explain or address this question in today's lecture, particularly by discussing one model of happiness, which is called a sustainable happiness model, proposed by Sonja and her colleagues. So, we will try to see what are the other aspects to it. So, in today's lecture we will address the issues such as is pursuit of happiness futile, some sources of optimism for increasing happiness, and we will discuss sustainable happiness model. So, let us see some of the important aspects to it. So, it is clear from the last lecture that certain strong barriers are there, which kinds of creates barriers in sustainably increasing our happiness level, such as genetic set point, personality factors, and hedonic adaptation. Additionally, it was also found, or we have discussed in the last lecture that hedonic adaptation is more complete and faster in case of positive experiences. So, when we become happier because of some positive changes, we become very quickly we get adapted to them and we completely adapt to them. So, that means it is more difficult to sustain our happiness level or positive emotional state because we get adapted to it very quickly. Then the question is it then futile to pursue happiness? Research shows that it is not futile because there are evidences that shows we can increase our sense of happiness level, or at least in many evidences shows that there can be a sustainable increase in happiness level by pursuing certain interventions or certain activities. So, Lyubomirsky or Sonja Lyubomirsky and her colleague suggested some of the possible sources of optimism in the pursuit of happiness from existing research literature. They explained, they discussed that some interventions for increasing happiness seems to work as practicing virtues such as gratitude, forgiveness, etc. Many research evidences shows that certain intervention strategies to increase our happiness level, such as practicing certain virtuous things such as gratitude, forgiveness, etc., actually increases our sense of happiness level and to a significant level. So, this is one indication or proof that we can pursue happiness or increase our sense of happiness level. Research also shows that many motivational and attitudinal factors facilitates happiness and well-being, such as pursuing intrinsically motivated goals and cultivating optimistic thinking. So, research also indicates that the certain types of goal, if you pursue, that also enhances our level of happiness in a sustainable way, and also practicing optimistic thinking. These are some of the things that research indicates can be a valid intervention in terms of increasing happiness level. Many research, both cross-sectional and longitudinal research, indicates that older people tend to be happier than younger ones. At least recently, some research indicate that as people progress in the life, or especially in the older age, generally people the level of subjective well-being or happiness seems to increase. Let us say after 50s and 60s, 60 years of life. So, that also indirectly indicates that happiness can increase, depending on our various attitudinal and volitional factors, which may change in the later life. So, these are some of the important indicators or some evidences or sources of optimism that shows that pursuit of happiness is not futile. There are some possible intervention or activities that can be done to increase our sense of happiness or at least positive emotional experiences. So, I mean in the last lecture we have discussed some very strong barriers in increasing happiness, because these factors such as genetics, personality traits, hedonic adaptation seems to create strong barriers in increasing happiness level, and also we have seen some evidences that people can actually enhance their sense of happiness by pursuing certain activities. So, there seems to be a paradox here. So, we will see it is not a paradox actually, and we will try to address this issue or this particular question, can we become happier, using a particular model of happiness which is called as sustainable happiness model. So, sustainable happiness model, it is a model proposed by Lyubomirsky, Sheldon and Skede in 2005. So, they proposed a model, and it is one of the very highly cited paper where they proposed a model of happiness which is called as sustainable happiness model. So, they specifically proposed three major determinants or causal factors of happiness, the three important factors that determines our happiness level in our life. One is called as genetic set point, which we have discussed. Another is our life circumstances, and another factor is called as intentional activities. So, they propose that these three important factors determine our level of happiness. So, these are important causal factors that can influence our happiness level in our life. So, based on the past research into various populations, they propose some approximate percentages contributed by these three factors. each of these factors in our life. So, they propose that based on the existing evidence in the population, that approximately 50% of variance in happiness is accounted by genetic set point. So, about 50% is in variance of happiness level can be explained by our genetic composition, about 10% by our life circumstances. Some of the evidence shows that about 10 to 15% can be explained by our life circumstances, and they propose remaining 40% can be accounted by intentional activities. So, they said there are three important factors, and they used a pie chart to show this three factors and their percentages. So, this pie chart is somehow like this. So, this is about 50% is genetic set point. So, this one is life circumstances, about 10%, and remaining they said can be explained by intentional activities that we do in our life. So, this was the pie chart by which they tried to explain these three important factors and their possible contributory percentages in our happiness level. Obviously, these percentages were kind of criticized by many researchers that it is not appropriate to exactly pinpoint the percentages which makes up our total happiness level, and they themselves also kind of says that these are indicative, it may not be exactly 50, 10 or 40, but these are some of the indicative percentages as reported by researcher in different populations. So, some criticisms are there, we will also discuss what are the some criticisms of this model later, but the idea is this they basically talking about three important factors and their possible contribution. It may not be exactly these percentages, but this is what they showed in their model. So, let us see each of these factors and how they can relate to our happiness level. So, genetic set point we have already discussed in the last lecture that it is one of the barriers actually, because it sets certain limits, beyond that we cannot really jump much. So, set point is basically is a genetically determined and assumed to be fixed. Generally, it is fixed because you cannot really change your genetics, at least it is not easy to change, and it is that stable over time and immune to influences of control. So, generally genetic contribution you cannot really change and you do not have much control over it, whatever genetics contributes. So, this is a set point that determines certain baseline level of happiness, and we have already discussed there were many twin studies, evidences from various studies shows that genetics plays very strong role in determining our happiness level or subjective well-being. So, evidences from twin studies and personality traits provide support for this component or stable component of happiness. So, although studies found varying heritability, we have discussed the concept of heritability also in the last class, where the idea is that the percentage of or the variance of a particular trait in a population that can be explained by genetics is basically called as heritability. So, different studies show different heritability coefficients or percentages. Generally, they kind of explained saying that by approximately 50% variance can be attributed to genetic composition. So, at least about 50% can be explained by explained in our subjective well-being or happiness by genetic contribution. So, one aspect is genetic set point, and it is generally fixed and stable. We cannot really do much about it, because genetics is generally beyond our control. The next factor that is there in the sustainable happiness model, which contributes to our happiness, is our life circumstances. Now, life circumstances basically are kind of incidental but stable facts of our life. So, we are kind of born into different life circumstances. So, many circumstances are kind of, we find ourselves in different circumstances once we take birth. For example, the place of your birth, the kind of facilities, the kind of environmental situation, the culture, the cultural and geographic region in which you were born. So, lot of these life circumstances are kind of given to us, most of them, and we find ourselves in certain life circumstances. So, these are life circumstances are basically their incidental. You mostly do not choose them. They are incidental, but and relatively stable. Life circumstances do not change so often. We can change obviously some aspect of it, but they generally do not change so often. So, life circumstances basically means that. So, these are certain stable facts of our life, but these are mostly incidental. We do not choose most of them. So, according to Libomirsky and her colleague, happiness relevant circumstances. So, various life circumstances may include the national, geographic and cultural region of residence, where what is your national, geographic or cultural location where you took birth or where you are residing. So, this is also one aspect of your life circumstances. Demographic factors such as age, gender, ethnicity, these are also your life circumstances. What is your gender, what is your ethnicity, what is the age group, which may change slowly, but these are some of the things that determines your life circumstances. Individual personal history such as experience of past trauma, accidents, these are also incidental things that happens in our life, some accidents, some traumatic events that happens. These are also part of our life circumstances. Then the life status variables are also included in the life circumstances, such as your marital status, your income, your health, your religious affiliation, all these are also part of your life circumstances. So, if you see most of them are kind of incidental, but generally they are stable facts of our life. So, generally the research shows the life circumstances which are most consistently related to high subjective well-being or happiness are being married. At least some of the research shows in western countries that being married also consistently predict high subjective well-being. Being religious also could also increase your subjective well-being, because many people seek their happiness from religion. So, certain they pursue certain moral values and certain lifestyle which may enhance happiness level. Being employed is obviously an important factor which predict high subjective well-being. Being healthy is also very important, your physical health as well as mental health, these are very important predictor of subjective well-being. Then sufficient wealth to meet basic needs. So, your income, if it is sufficient to meet your basic needs of your life, then it is also very important predictor of your subjective well-being, or it predicts high subjective well-being. So, these are some of the important factors which may be connected to your life circumstances and they predict high subjective well-being or happiness. So, generally a lot of research shows that obviously life circumstances plays important role in our happiness level or in our subjective well-being, but most of the research shows their contribution is not very high. They are not very strongly connected, and the contribution to happiness level at least a lot of research indicates that it is not very high. So, all life circumstances combined account for very small percentages of variance, happiness level of 8 to 15%, some research indicates. So, different researches in different population indicate that life circumstances contributes to happiness level, but the contribution is not very strong. It could be from 8 to 15%. Which is a kind of counterintuitive because many of us generally think our life circumstances are really very important in terms of determining our happiness level. So, and many people constantly seek to change their life circumstances, which is okay, but actually they do not contribute much to our happiness level, as at least research indicates that. One of the reasons why this could be the possible reasons for finding is that why life circumstances do not contribute much to our happiness level. One of the reason could be hedonic adaptation to life circumstances. People seems to adapt to life circumstances very quickly, either it is either positive or negative life circumstances, because these are generally constant facts of your life. You cannot really do much. Obviously, certain life circumstances can be changed and it takes time, but some certain life circumstances are given to you and you cannot change them. So, once few certain things are kind of a constant background, we generally get adapted to them. For how much time you can really worry about it or become very happy about it. So, after sometimes we generally get adapted to it and it does not really bother us much. So, we get adapted to them. So, because of hedonic adaptation to life circumstances, we generally they do not contribute much, although there is a potential for life circumstances to contribute to our happiness level much, but because of hedonic adaptation possibly the contribution is not that high. So, both genetic set point and life circumstances are not large, they are largely not in our control. We cannot really do much about it. So, to increase our happiness level, we cannot really do much intervention in these two areas, in the genetic set point, genetic aspect, and in the life circumstances also not much can be done. Although some circumstances can be changed, certain life circumstances obviously we can change, for example, income, you may change your location of your residence. So, certain things obviously we can do, there is no doubt about it, but the problem is a lot of these life circumstances, even if we change, there is a possibility of hedonic adaptation. So, we may again get adapted to newer life circumstances. So, after certain time it may not really make much contribution to our sense of happiness or well-being. So, we cannot do much in terms of these two aspects, genetic set point and life circumstances, but obviously certain changes in life circumstances we can change them, and obviously it can do certain contribute positively, but it may not be very strong and very long lasting. So, one last component in the sustainable happiness model is called as intentional activities. According to the Sonja and her colleagues who proposed the model, they said this intentional activity is one particular aspect which gives a fruitful avenues for our pursuit of happiness. This is one area which is more in our control and we can do lot about it in terms of changing our happiness level or pursuing happiness level. So, let us see what is this intentional activities. So, intentional activities by definition means activities that we do either at the action level or at the thought level, and which are intentional means you do it with your choice and effort. So, that is why it is intentional, you need to do something about it, it will not happen automatically. So, intentional activities are effortful actions or practices that include variety of things people think and do. So, various thought processes and various actions that we do in our life, which are intentionally effortful activities that we do or practices that we do, are all collectively can be called as intentional activities. So, intentional means effortful or people choose to engage them. So, we choose to engage in them. It is not something that is automatically will happen, just like life circumstances are mostly, and it is given to us. So, intentional activities does not happen by itself. So, it will not happen. You have to do and engage in it. It needs conscious effort. Leibovitsky and her colleagues in their model posited that life circumstances happen to people, because they generally we find ourselves in certain life circumstances, but intentional activities are ways that people act on their circumstances. So, how do we act and think about those life circumstances? That is intentional activities. So, it is more intentional and conscious efforts that we do, and it is not given. So, we need to do something about it. So, intentional activities by definition they are intentional, we do it on our own volition and control. So, these are more controllable than genetic factors and personality and life circumstances. Genetics, personality and life circumstances, we do not have much control over them, but intentional activity is something that we have a lot of control over it, because we are doing it, and it offers the greatest potential for sustainably increase our happiness. And this is one area where we can really do a lot of intervention in terms of increasing our happiness level. So, if you can summarize that intentional activities, characteristics of intentional activities are: so, intentional activities are, one thing is they are effortful, we choose to engage, they are conscious, they are controllable, offers potential, to sustainably increase happiness. So, these are some of the characteristics that we have discussed of intentional activities. So, we do lot of intentional activities in our life throughout the day. So, so intentional activities can be of different kinds and different varieties of activities we can do. So, we should remember not all intentional activities will lead to increase in happiness. We should understand intentional activities can lead to suffering also, and can lead to increase in happiness level depending on what type of activities you do. So, certain the research indicates that certain types of intentional activities are beneficial for enhancing our subjective well-being or well-being in general. So, we will look into, when we are talking about intentional activities here, we are typically talking in terms of increasing happiness level. So, those kind of intentional activities we are specifically focusing on. So, intentional activities can be of different types, as I said. So, in their model they describe intentional activities can be of three types. One is behavioral activity, that is activities or actions that we do. Intentional activities can be at the action level. So, behavioral activities reflect person's actions, different kinds of actions such as physical activities. One can do meditation, mindfulness, social activities, acts of kindness, gratitude. So, different types of actions that we do, and they may influence our sense of happiness. So, all these particular activities that we have here, various physical activities, it could include exercises, meditation, mindfulness, social activities, pro-social activities, acts of kindness, gratitude, all this at the behavioral level, research indicates all these types of activities can lead to higher happiness or subjective well-being. Now, intentional activities can be also cognitive level. At the cognitive activity means at the thought level, or different kinds of thoughts and attitudes that we take in our life, they also influences our happiness level. It could include cultivating gratitude, forgiveness. At the thought level, one can cultivate sense of gratitude, sense of forgiveness. Then various thought processes, it could be positive thinking, various thought processes that can lead to coping with various adversities and crises of life. All this can be cognitive activities. So, at the thought level, different activities that we do, and we have discussed how thoughts can influence our emotions and how can thoughts be used to cope with adversities and stressful life in detail in one of the past lecture. So, some of this cognitive activity are found to increase subjective well-being. Third level of type of intentional activity are called as volitional activity. So, volitional activity basically means the different types of motivation towards pursuing and achieving goals. Pursuing and achieving goals can also influence our happiness level, particularly goals that are that are intrinsic to us, that are in line with our intrinsic motivation, intrinsic values. The pursuit of such goal always seems to increase our sense of subjective well-being or happiness. So, one volitional activity which could be in line with our intrinsic motivation could be, let us say you are highly interested or intrinsically interested to pursue creative activities such as let us say painting or writing. So, if you set certain goals in those direction of creative activities such as painting something or writing some book or something. So, if you pursue those kind of goal because you are interested into those kind of goal intrinsically and not just given from outside order or something, then pursuing such goals really increases our sense of happiness. So, volitional activity could include those kind of activities, pursuit of certain goals. So, briefly we can kind of show it like this. Intentional activities here can be of three types. So, types of intentional activity may include behavioral, which basically means actions, such as acts of kindness. We will discuss more in detail about some of these intentional activities very specifically, such as acts of kindness and gratitude. We will have separate lectures on each of these. So, I am not explaining them now. So, behavioral may include actions such as acts of kindness. Cognitive intentional activities may include thoughts and attitudes. Such as cultivating forgiveness at the thought level, or positive thinking could be also another example. And the last type is volitional. Volitional basically means pursuing and achieving goals. such as self concordant goals. So, self concordant goal basically means goals which are in line with your intrinsic values and motivation. Any goals that you really like to achieve, not because of some external reason, but simply you intrinsically value them or like them. So, pursuing such goals found to be very important in terms of enhancing our subjective well-being. So, intentional activities can be of different types and categories. Some criticism to this happiness pie chart model that we have discussed. No? So, I will just briefly talk about some criticisms that are there for this pie chart model, that we have shown. 50% genetic set point and 10% life circumstances, 40% intentional activities. Some researchers criticize this, talking in terms of specific percentages may not be appropriate. So, some criticisms are, I will just discuss very briefly about them. Brown and Rohrer in 2019, they made a critical evaluation of that, and they basically indicated following important points. One is between subject variance versus within subject variance, that two things were mixed up together in that model. So, basically happiness pie model mixed up between subject variance with within subject variance. Basically means what? Most of these percentages that for example, 50% is contributed by genetics. These percentages are generally shown in the population level or between subject, different populations and samples from there this percentage was taken. So, mostly it is between subject kind of thing, and when it was shown in the model, it was shown as if it is, if you take one individual, 50% will be determined by genetics and 10% will be by life circumstances. So, it was kind of within subject shown more in terms of within subject. So, the mixing two things may not be appropriate. So, this was one of the criticism it was given. So, variation within a population, so most of these percentage are taken as from the population variance, cannot be translated at the individual level. So, for example, 10% of the between subject variance in happiness can be explained by life circumstances. It is at the population level, is not same as 10% of a person's variance in the happiness can be explained by that person's life circumstances. So, this percentage can be true in the population level, but may not be true in the individual level. Individual level, that life circumstances may not exactly contribute to 10%. So, this was mixed in that model. So, this was one of the criticism. Second is, the model considered all the three factors as independent. So, they kind of conceptualize all the three factors of happiness pie chart as independent and additive factors. So, they are considered like independent factors that contribute to happiness, and they can be added together to lead to 100% percentage. That may not be true because in real life, they said all the three factors may interact and covary to influence happiness. So, in real life, all these three are may not be separately acting on us, but they kind of interact with each other and then influence. So, exactly saying this is causing this much percentage, this is causing this much percentage may not be true in our real life situation. So, for example, genetic factors may interact with circumstantial and volitional activities to influence our happiness level. So, all these three factors may actually interact with each other and then determine rather than individually determining happiness level. And the third criticism is the estimates are taken from different sources. So, happiness pie model took the estimates of variance explained by genetic factors and life circumstances from different sources. It is not from just one sample or one particular individual and different populations. So, therefore, combining them together and adding them as 100% may be erroneous or may not be appropriate. So, these are some of the criticism to that showing a criticism not to the model itself, but criticism specifically to showing specific percentages in terms of contributory percentages to happiness level. The original the researcher who proposed Sonja Lyubomirsky and Sheldon and other, they kind of already indicated in their model that they are not saying that these percentages are exactly the percentage that should be taken as very literally, but they are more indicative kind of percentages. So, they accept this criticism and they kind of indicated it in their model itself that these are indicative and approximate rather than actual. So, they already said they may not be exact. So, the basic, however, the basic idea of sustainable happiness model still can be very significant and important in terms of giving insight to understanding and increasing our happiness level. So, the three important components or factors that contribute to our happiness level is various research shows they are very important and they are major factors in determining our happiness level. So, the factors are very important, there is no doubt about it, and a lot of research evidences are there. So, the basic idea is there, idea is true about this model, and particularly that we can enhance our happiness level by doing intentional activity is something a lot of research already showed evidence towards that. So, the basic idea that it is possible for people to influence their own happiness by intentional activity is correct, and it was kind of shown in different studies. So, as it is clear that our happiness is not completely determined by genetics and life circumstances, that is also true. It will be true for every individual also and even the population also, that it is not completely determined by our genetics or life circumstances. So, we can at least explain these fluctuations or the remaining factors by our intentional activities. It is a logical source to influence our fluctuations in happiness level. So, if happiness level keeps on fluctuating from time to time, so there may be many intentional factors involved in it. So, intentional factors can contribute to our happiness level. So, it may not be exactly that percentage, but this is an important factors and it can give an important area or area of intervention. So, so we can learn, so at least the percentage part is kind of criticized, but from the sustainable happiness model at least indicates important factors and that happiness fluctuates in our life, and it is the intentional activity that contributes to those fluctuations, and we can intervene. One of the important aspects of intervention for increasing our happiness or well-being could be intentional activities, at least a lot of research indicates that. So, we will look more into this intentional activity part, because this has a lot of applied implication in our life. In the next lecture also we will talk about the important aspects of intentional activities, and beyond that in upcoming lectures we will talk specific intentional activities that research found to be important in terms of facilitating subjective well-being and happiness. So, we will talk specifically, let us say for example, practicing gratitude, acts of kindness, practicing our our signature strengths, etc., we will look very specifically certain areas where we can work and increase our happiness level. So, with this I will end today's lecture. Thank you.